Fighting games are one of the oldest and most diverse genres of competitive video games out there. With a premise as simple as two folks duking it out, it's only natural that each game would introduce a wide variety of unique and interesting characters to help them stick out from one another. Even with the genre going on for so long, that's bound to create a few characters that have a handful of similarities to each other. These surface-level similarities are often referred to as archetypes, and whether you're someone that only believes in the big three, or you're the kind of player that prefers more hyper-specific archetypes, it's always a good idea to at least get a rough idea of what archetype a character falls into, and what are some common strengths and weaknesses of that archetype. An interesting example of this is Guilty Gear Strive, which, in one of its many efforts to be more accessible, introduced the battle type system. Basically the game's way of categorizing the characters based on a handful of similarities in their game plan, with one of the easiest examples of this being probably my favorite battle type in the game, zoning. With a heavy emphasis on using both strong pokes and unique character-specific options to control space, zoning is probably one of the most unique and dynamic battle types in the game. And since this also happens to be the battle type Venom falls into, I would like to celebrate his relatively recent release by going over all 4 zoning characters in the game. So without further ado, let's get started. The first stop on our little zoning journey is probably the most read-heavy character in the game, the time-traveling Brit, Axel Lowe. And right off the bat, one of the most important things to mention about him is his defense. Or rather, lack thereof. You see, outside of universal mechanics like burst or flawless defense, most characters, especially ones that lack unique defensive options, are going to rely on using either the standing and or crouching version of their basic punch and kick buttons. Since one of the two is usually that character's fastest move, so that combined with proper use of flawless defense is usually a good way to get someone off your back in most cases. Axel does not have access to this since most of his punch buttons are just slow enough that mashing them on defense is genuinely a terrible idea, and while his kick buttons are usually his fastest buttons, they're not as reliable on defense as other characters' jab buttons are. Meaning his only reliable form of defense outside of universal mechanics is his Sickle Storm Super, since it's the only invincible reversal he has. So if his punch and kick buttons are so slow, why would anyone bother Yeah, in exchange for having some of the slowest and easily punished buttons in the game, Axel also has some of the farthest reaching normals in the game. He's got buttons that serve as pretty good anti-airs, buttons that threaten the space immediately in front of him, buttons that threaten the mid-range. With his normals alone, he can threaten any part of the screen just short of full screen, and even then, he has a couple of specials specifically for that purpose. One of these moves is his main method of full screen zoning, Sickle Flash. How it works is that Axel will throw one of his sickles to the other side of the screen, and from there, you can do one of 3 follow-ups. There's Winter Cherry, a move where the sickle just fucking explodes, allowing you to hit your opponent a second time, or catch more impatient foes off guard. Soaring Chain Strike, which sends the sickle in an upward arc, dragging your opponents closer to you, and allowing you to swap them out of the air like a fly. But, if used recklessly, it does have a good chance of your opponent air blocking it, which, for this move in particular, basically just means you handed them a free opportunity to go on the offense, so use it with caution. Finally, there's Spinning Chain Strike, a move where Axel spins his chains rapidly in front of him like a Beyblade. This can be used to score a knockdown, but be warned, only the bottom part of the spin actually has a hitbox, meaning if you miss, you're leaving yourself very vulnerable to getting punished. Some other specials of note are Winter Mantis, a command grab where Axel throws his sickle underground before pulling it up on the other side of the screen. Generally, it's very hard to hit the opponent with this move, but it does absolute wonders if they're holding block on the opposite side of the screen. Axel Bomber, a fiery uppercut that can only be used while jumping, and while it looks like a DP, it isn't. It's more of a combo tool than a reversal, and it should be used with that in mind. Whistling Wind, a move where Axel charges up a gust of wind before sending it out as a tornado. Uncharged, it doesn't go very far and serves as a niche and difficult to use combo tool. But if you hold down the button, the move charges up, allowing the tornado to go farther and serve as a temporary wall to block off your opponent's approach. Lastly, there's the cherry on top of his moveset, his second super, One Vision. How it works is that when you do these input for the super, Axel will surround himself with a purple aura that will last a short time, and if you do the input again before the aura goes away, Axel will freeze time, allowing you to either set up or continue some powerful combos. Personally, in my opinion, despite how amazing it is in the grand scheme of things, learning how to utilize the super properly is not all that necessary to getting good with Axel, especially since the time stop effect can be completely negated if the opponent happens to be blocking while you're doing the input a second time. Which, that alone makes the super only truly useful in some niche scenarios, but I've also seen some people online do some absolutely crazy shit with this super, so I figured it was at least worth a mention. Overall, Axel Low has a playstyle revolving around forcing your opponent into specific positions, before then trying to correctly guess what option they'll take to get out of it, with the correct guess essentially locking your foe in gay baby jail, and an incorrect guess potentially leading to you getting the ass beating of a lifetime. So if you like the idea of reading your opponent like a book, and you find the idea of controlling the screen with highly committal but far-reaching normals appealing, then I highly suggest you give this fat chap a chance, mate! Something I want to clear off the bat before I start this segment properly is, with every other character I'm talking about in this video, my win count with them is somewhere between 40 to 80 something, which is not all that impressive in the grand scheme of things, but it's not that bad considering that I'm the kind of person that likes messing around with the cast rather than sticking to specific characters. Don't get me wrong, I have my mains, but I rather mess around with the characters rather than just focus on one or two. I bring all of this up because my win count with Testament is, by the time I'm recording this, well within the 300s. So, yeah, I thought that would be an important detail to mention before moving forward. Testament is, in fact, one of my mains. So, with that little detail cleared up, what exactly are your goals when playing this character? What is exactly this character's game plan? Well, to put it simply, as Testament, your goal is to use powerful screen control options in order to obtain absolute dominance and control over the battlefield. A lot of which is reliant on their admittedly small number of special moves that, when utilized properly, expertly work in tandem with both each other and their normals. With their first special move being Grave Reaper, a crimson skull that is sent flying towards your opponent in one of three directions, depending on which version you use. The slash version of the move will always go forward no matter what, while the heavy slash version will either be sent diagonally upwards or downwards, depending on whether or not you were in the air. Both versions of the move can be held down in order to send a projectile that travels slightly further and way slower, which can be used to force your opponent to change their approach. But that's not even the best part of the move, because when the skull disappears, it'll leave behind a succubus, which can be utilized to play all sorts of mind games with your opponent, since two of your special moves can only truly be utilized when there's a succubus on screen. The first of these moves is Possession. When there's no succubus on screen, the move does nothing. No, seriously. Outside of stalling your air momentum slightly, there's no real reason you should be using this move when there isn't a succubus on screen. But if there is a succubus on screen, then Testament will teleport to the succubus's current location, allowing you to perform powerful mix-ups, and, if set up ahead of time, could potentially allow you to get out of the way of your opponent's attempt to start their offense. Additionally, when using the teleport, the succubus does not disappear, allowing you to get some potentially powerful if niche setups with the next move in their arsenal, Unholy Diver, an attack where Testament sends out a crow towards the opponent. The crow will either fly in a horizontal line slightly above Testament's head, or will home in on the succubus's current position. Now, while the crow doesn't do that much damage by itself, it more than makes up for it by inflicting the opponent with a status called Stain. Once inflicted, the next attack Testament lands will cause Stain to pop, which on block will make your next block string a little bit safer, but on hit will send your opponent into the air slightly, which opens the door for some insanely powerful combos if you know what you're doing. And it's here that I would like to address a common criticism I see thrown towards Testament. That being, for as powerful a tool Stain is, there's only two ways to inflict it. One of them being the aforementioned Unholy Diver, which admittedly is a little difficult to hit the opponent with sometimes, especially if the succubus happens to be at an awkward angle. And the second one being their Nostrovania super, where they send out 2 succubi to perform a flurry of advancing kicks towards the opponent. And don't get me wrong, it's a really good super, like a damn good super, but the opponent can easily jump over it, and Stain is only inflicted if the last hit of the super connects. Meaning, if they block or avoid that last hit specifically, well, you're kind of shit out of luck. Now, while I can understand these criticisms, I can't help but notice a lot of people that tend to make this criticism are the same people that happen to think Stain is the main defining aspect of their game plan, when in reality, it's just straight up isn't. Now, don't get it twisted, learning how to use Stain is still a very, very important part of their kit, but it's not absolutely essential to win games, nor is it any more important than any of Testament's other tools. Because a Testament that knows how to use Stain properly can more so use the threat of Stain to play all kinds of mind games whenever there's a succubus on screen, and make the opponent constantly question their approach, which will lead to them making mistakes that you can absolutely capitalize on. Now for their last special move, Arbiter's Sign, a move where Testament plunges their scythe into the ground, summoning a bloody maw that will bite either above or below the opponent's current position, depending on which version you use. The slash version bites upward and counts as a low, while the heavy slash version bites downward and counts as a high. And real quick, I'd like to bring up 2 core flaws this move has. First off, the move has a glaring blind spot directly in front of Testament. And the second flaw is that the move is straight up terrible at hitting moving opponents, since it's just slow enough that if most characters are already moving, they can outrun the bite. Now, while those are some rather large flaws, especially as a move that's a part of a zoning character's toolkit, yet, despite these flaws, this move straight up might be my favorite move in the entire game. Reason being that, outside of the obvious high-low mix-up, this move doesn't really have a solid purpose or situation that it's meant to be used in, which, incidentally, makes it probably the most versatile move in Testament's entire kit. For example, the opponent's holding block on the opposite side of the screen like a little bitch. Use Arbiter's Sign. Want to follow up for either forward punch or forward heavy? Use Arbiter's Sign. Want to follow up for a successful Nostrovania? Use Arbiter's Sign. Fishing for a good Stain combo? Use Arbiter's Sign. As you've probably picked up by now, if you can get creative enough and get the timing down just right, you can practically do anything with this move. Which really sums the character up as a whole, as with proper setup and enough creativity, you can take control of virtually any situation and put it in your favor. So, if taking absolute control over the screen in order to play mind games with your foe sounds appealing, then I highly recommend you become acquaintances with this gothic, elegant monarch. Plus, as a bonus, they're fucking hot, so... So, remember how I said near the start of the video that zoning characters tend to focus on strong pokes and unique ways of controlling space? Yeah, the weird thing is, while Johnny still technically does that, he doesn't really have anything that creates or enforces a game plan surrounding these 2 aspects. For example, outside of his Joker Trick super, he doesn't really have any full screen options, and even then, Joker Trick is more of an anti-zoning tool and a surprisingly effective combo ender than anything else. And while other zoning characters usually like to keep their distance until they can get their offense going, by contrast, Johnny more so prefers to assault the mid-range while occasionally making an insanely risky move to get their offense going. Basically, what I'm saying here is that Johnny is proof that a character doesn't need to be a zoner in order to be in the zoning battle type, because while he ain't a zoner by any means, all that really means is that he's putting their strengths into entirely different, yet, in my opinion, equally good uses. A good example of this is with Mistfinder, a move that is, by all means, practically the centerpiece of his toolkit. Best way I can describe this move is basically an old Western style quick draw, with the instantaneous firing of a gun replaced with a speed slash of a sword. The titular sword slash going in one of 3 directions, depending on which button you press. Punch does an upward slash, kick does a horizontal slash, and the slash button attacks downward, and unlike the other 2 versions, will grant a knockdown on hit. And believe it or not, this is just the tip of the iceberg, since before the move is performed, Johnny will go into a Mistfinder stance and will stay in this stance for as long as the button is held down, allowing him to move left or right to better position the attack. Additionally, while in Mistfinder stance, Johnny gains the ability to perform a unique dash in order to quickly create or close distance. Also, by pressing heavy slash while in the stance will be cancelled, which is good since while in this stance, Johnny can't block. Furthermore, he also has a move called Deal, where he throws out a card that slightly floats down to the ground. And while the card by itself doesn't do any damage, when struck with any version of Mistfinder, the card will explode, causing either Guard Crush on block or launching the opponent air on hit, setting them up for a combo either way. Additionally, there's an alternate version of this move called Deal Midair, where he throws a card down like a ninja star, and unlike the normal version of Deal, the card itself actually does some damage. But this version can only be performed while in, the air, or during a different move called Vault. Speaking of which, Johnny has 2 very committal mobility options, Vault and a Step Dash. Vault is a special move where he takes a large leap forward, and if he presses heavy slash during the animation, will perform Deal Midair, the timing of which can actually be varied quite a bit depending on what point in animation you perform the move, making it an extremely good approach option that is admittedly a little bit risky since it's very easy to swap him out of the air if you use the move recklessly. Alongside this, he's also one of the few characters in the game that have a step dash instead of a regular sprint dash, with the difference being that with a sprint dash, you're constantly running forward, but with a step dash, it's more like one burst movement forward. With his step dash in particular actually having the most distance and being one of the faster ones in the game, but to compensate for it, he can't block out of it until near the end of the animation, making it very likely you'll get punished for it. Finally, there's his last special, Ensenga, a fiery sword slash that's an excellent whiff punish tool that's also surprisingly good in combos, and has a unique property where if the opponent blocks it, it'll push them back, creating distance between you and the opponent. So, if you like the idea of a risk-taking mid-range fighter making unique use out of the usual strengths and weaknesses of zoners, then feel free to place your bets on this gambling, womanizing air pirate. God, I love this series. And finally, we have arrived at the newest character on this list, the former assassin turned vigilante, Venom. And before I actually say anything, I do want to put it out there that because Venom is the newest character on this list, and it's only been like a month or so since its release, this segment of the video is probably the most likely to be wrong, or at the very least become outdated over time. And that's because of the simple fact that once a fighting game character releases, it usually takes the community quite a while to truly come to a consensus about the character's strengths, weaknesses, best strategies with the character, and you can bet that's doubled for a character that's designed to be difficult on purpose like Venom is. Granted, that doesn't mean I'm not going to try my best to present the most accurate information possible while giving you my thoughts on the character. I just wanted to put that little warning out there before we get started. Now, with that being said, I would like to talk about probably the most important part of his kit. His balls. Just like in older games, Venom has the ability to set up pool balls and smack them around the screen at various speeds and angles. However, this time around there's a couple of key differences in how it works, the first major one being how ball set works in this game. In older games, when using the move ball set, the exact position of the ball changes depending on which button you pressed, with each button corresponding to a different pattern, with every ball that was placed beforehand shifting around their position in order to fit that pattern. This pattern mechanic was completely removed in Strive, as now the ball will always be placed in the exact same position every time depending on which button you press when performing ball set. Punch will always place the ball slightly above the ground, Slash will always place the ball high in the air, Kick and Heavy will always place the ball in the middle of the screen, with Kick being closer to you and Heavy/being further away from you, and Dust places absolutely nothing, because, well, this ult exists. On paper, this seems like a drastic and somewhat limiting change that sacrifices a large chunk of the character's variety, but upon closer inspection, at least on a casual level, this change doesn't really mean anything. Since, let's be real here, if you're using Ball Set, you're probably in an advantageous position to do so, and most of the time, that's because you either just got a knockdown or the opponent is far away from you. And if you're in those situations, you're probably not going to set up more than 1 or 2 balls, since any more would be a massive risk that's unlikely to pay off. Meaning you're probably only going to memorize the location of where the first ball is placed, which kinda defeats the purpose of having multiple patterns in the first place. Changing topics slightly, another massive change was made to how ball physics work. In older games, once you hit a ball, while the speed of the ball changes depending on which attack you hit it with, the ball itself never stops moving. In Strive, there is an added factor of distance, as ball attacks that would have sent balls flying at slow speeds now instead only send balls short distances. This additional factor of distance, combined with the removal of ball shifting, puts an emphasis on positioning balls yourself before going on the offense. Alongside this, there are 2 moves that act as alternative ways of getting ball set up. The first is a altered version of Ball Set called Ball Set Multiple, which is much slower, but if you manage to pull it off, sets all 4 of Venom's balls up at once, allowing you to quickly go on the offense. The second one is a move from Xrd called Q5, a move where Venom sends out a wave of psychic energy that sets up a ball in front of him. And like a move we'll be talking about later, you can charge up the move in order to set up a ball with special properties. But as for this move, however, you're mainly going to be using it in order to set up balls in the middle of a combo. Moving away from all the ball talk, Venom has 2 charge moves in Stinger Aim and Carcass Raid. Both moves fire out a ball at high speeds, with Stinger Aim firing the ball straight forward, and Carcass Raid firing the ball in one of 2 upward angles depending on which version you use. Besides being a good way to start a chain reaction with all the pool balls you set up, both moves have a unique property that stems from the fact that they're both charge moves. Unlike traditional motion inputs, charge inputs are performed by holding a direction and then hitting in the opposite direction while pressing the corresponding button. Because of this, you can sneak the start of the charge during the animation of specific normals in order to perform the move in the middle of a combo. Hell, if you get the timing down just right, you can straight up spam Stinger Aim by using this technique. Additionally, both moves share a property with Q5 where you can hold the button down after performing the corresponding input in order to get a unique ball that can hit the opponent more than one time. Now, while the charged version of both of these moves can be performed on the ground, Carcass Raid in particular actually received an aerial version that is performed with a motion input instead of a charge input. Now, while we're on the topic of new moves, Venom also gained a command grab called Tarambaka, where upon a successful grab, Venom turns the opponent into a ball that can be knocked around in order to set up unique combos at the cost of any damage the opponent receives while in ball form being heavily scaled, meaning you probably won't get much from said combos outside of meter and maybe a decent positioning advantage. Finally, the last move of his I wish to discuss is, quite frankly, a solid contender for the best super in the game, Dark Angel. Just like in older games, Venom summons a giant orb of darkness before sending it towards the opponent, dealing massive damage on hit, and dealing solid chip damage or meter drain if they block it. This time around, however, the move got a unique buff in the form of Robokai, who, if the move hits, will pop out of the orb when it disappears and fire a rocket at the opponent before flying away. This follow-up attack, combined with the orb's slow travel speed, serves as an excellent way to pressure your opponent while also getting ample time to set up your pool balls and continue your offense. Really, the only downside to this move is the opponent could easily jump over it, but that's not as big as an issue as it used to be, since while Venom's anti-airs are still not the best, they're far better in this game compared to previous installments. As a whole, Venom is a very tricky and technical character that requires a lot of preparation and forethought being put into his offense, with his lack of a reversal and reliance on his pool ball almost making it difficult to get the ball rolling with him. So if you like the idea of setting up pool balls and having them ricochet off each other for some of the most oppressive pressure in the game, then I highly recommend you give this Phantom of the Night your time of day. Before I leave, I would like to give a shout out to Dustloop, since it was the articles on these characters on that site that was like a massive help in researching for this video. So yeah, I'll be linking those respective Dustloop pages in the description, and I highly recommend you look at them too, since there's a lot of stuff on those pages that I wasn't able to cover in this video. So with that said, I've been Edgy Psychic, and I will see you guys around.